I should warn you before I begin. What I'm about to tell you isn't a story I made up to scare you. It happened. To me. And even now, every time I close my eyes, I see it again. The smell, the sound of the knife, the face behind the mask. It all started when I took a job in the outskirts of town, at a butcher shop most people didn't even know existed. It was a squat, windowless building on the edge of the woods, its brick walls blackened by years of smoke and grease. The sign above the door was long gone, and the only light came from a flickering bulb above the entrance, buzzing like a trapped fly. The owner, a man named Mr. Grayson, hardly ever spoke. He wore a dirty apron that looked older than me, and his hands were always stained red, no matter how often he wiped them. When he did talk, his voice was low and hoarse, as if something inside his throat was raw. He only ever said one thing to me that first week. Don't ask where the deliveries come from. Just cut, clean, and pack. At first, I didn't question it. I needed the money, and the hours were quiet. But I couldn't ignore the strange details. The meat we received never came in trucks. No drivers, no invoices, no frozen packaging. I'd arrive in the morning, and there it would be, fresh, stacked in crates by the back door, dripping with a dark metallic liquid that stained the concrete. I told myself it was just local hunters, maybe some off-the-books suppliers. But the longer I worked there, the harder it was to believe that. The cuts weren't like anything I'd ever seen before. Too irregular, too human. The flesh had a density that made my hands ache after hours of cutting. And the smell, it wasn't the smell of beef, pork, or lamb. It clung to me, soaked into my skin, followed me home at night until I swore I could taste it in my mouth. One evening after closing, I stayed behind to scrub the counters. That's when I heard it, the sound of someone breathing in the cold room. Heavy, labored, like a tired animal. I froze, my sponge dripping pink water onto the floor. Slowly, I turned my head toward the metal door. It was slightly open. Inside, I caught a glimpse of movement. A figure hunched over one of the tables, sawing at something with deliberate, rhythmic strokes. The sound of bone cracking echoed through the chamber. My first thought was that Mr. Grayson had come back early, but as I stepped closer, I saw the mask. It wasn't a mask, not really. It was a face, a pig's face, stretched over human features, the eyes too real, too alive, staring at me as if they'd been waiting. The figure stopped cutting. Slowly, it raised the cleaver in its hand, still dripping with something dark and thick, and then it smiled. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to obey. It was as if the cold air in that room had frozen me in place. The pig-faced figure tilted its head slightly, studying me the way a butcher studies a slab of meat before deciding where to cut. The sound of the cleaver tapping against the wooden block was deliberate, taunting. Finally, I stumbled backward, knocking over a bucket of bloodied water that spilled across the tiles. The sound must have broken the spell, because suddenly I was moving again, pushing through the swinging door into the front of the shop. My heart was slamming in my chest, the metallic taste of fear rising in my throat. I didn't hear footsteps behind me. No pursuit, just silence. That was worse. Silence meant it was still there, watching. When I finally turned back, the cold room door was shut. No lock, no latch, but shut so tightly it looked as if it had never been open. For a long moment, I just stood there, shaking, waiting for it to burst out. It didn't, and that silence pressed against me like a weight. The next morning, I told myself it was exhaustion. Maybe I'd imagined the mask, the eyes. Maybe it had just been Mr. Grayson in a dim light. But when I arrived for my shift, Grayson wasn't there. In his place, on the counter where he usually stacked the knives, was a neat parcel wrapped in brown paper. No note, just a small smear of crimson bleeding through the folds. I should have left right then. I should have walked out, never looked back. But curiosity is a sickness, and mine was already too far gone. I unwrapped the package. Inside was a piece of flesh, marbled with fat, glistening as if it had just been carved. And pinned into it with a butcher's hook was a scrap of paper, smeared and almost unreadable. But the words burned into me like a brand. It wasn't animal flesh. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every distant sound outside my window, felt like it was following me. And in the quiet hours before dawn, I swore I heard breathing again. Not in the shop this time, but in my own hallway. Slow, deep breaths, dragging in and out until the boards of the floor seemed to groan under invisible weight. When I flung the door open, there was nothing, just darkness. The next day, I returned to the shop, desperate to confront Grayson. He was there this time, standing at the back table, sharpening a blade with slow, steady strokes. His eyes flicked up at me briefly, then back down. I demanded to know what kind of meat we'd been cutting, where it came from. He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to the freezer door. "You've already seen," he rasped. "No going back now." The air around me seemed to collapse, my lungs struggling to fill. The freezer door stood open just a crack, and inside I caught sight of something pale hanging from a hook. A hand. Small. Fragile. Human. I stumbled forward, but Grayson's hand clamped down on my shoulder. His grip iron strong. His voice was almost tender when he whispered, "The mask isn't for me. It's for them. They don't like to be recognized." I turned to look at him, but before I could speak, I noticed the reflection in the blade he was polishing. Over my shoulder, just behind me in the dark, stood another figure, pig-faced, breathing, waiting. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on that warped reflection in the blade, the pig-faced thing standing so close I should have felt its breath on my neck. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out everything else. But then, I did feel it. Warm, damp air brushing my skin, carrying that sickly sweet odor of rot and iron. I spun, shoving backward, but there was nothing, just the cold room door, wide open now. The hooks inside swayed as if something invisible had brushed past them, creaking like a choir of rusted pendulums. Grayson didn't move. He just smiled faintly, the corners of his cracked lips pulling upward as he whispered, "They've chosen you." The words clawed into me, and before I knew it, I was running, through the shop, out the door, into the night. The forest swallowed me whole, branches clawing at my arms as I stumbled blindly forward. Behind me, I thought I heard hooves pounding against the earth, wet snorts, laughter that wasn't quite human. Or maybe it was my own mind unraveling. I don't remember how I made it home. My clothes were torn, my hands raw, and I reeked of blood that wasn't mine. I locked every door, every window. I sat in the kitchen, clutching a knife, listening. Hours passed. Nothing came. At some point, exhaustion dragged me into sleep. But sleep wasn't safety. I dreamed of the shop, of the cold room, of rows upon rows of hanging carcasses that all looked human. Faces twisted in silent screams, their flesh carved away in neat symmetrical patterns. Among them, a figure moved, its pig face glistening, eyes bright with hunger. It raised its cleaver and pointed it at me. When I woke, it wasn't the nightmare that terrified me. It was the smell. That same rancid, coppery stench filling my house, stronger than ever. I staggered into the hallway and froze. My floorboards were wet. Dark streaks led from the front door to the kitchen. And then I heard it. The sound of a knife scraping against wood. Slow, deliberate. Coming from the very room I had just left. I crept back, every nerve in my body screaming to run, but I had to see. I had to know. The kitchen light flickered, and for a moment, I wished it had gone out completely. Because in that brief stutter of brightness, I saw him. Not Grayson. Not a dream. The pig-faced figure was sitting at my table, apron soaked through, cleaver poised over a slab of meat on the cutting board. My cutting board. It didn't look up at me right away. It just kept slicing, each motion smooth and patient. When it finally did lift its head, those wet eyes bored into me, unblinking. And with a slow, deliberate motion, it pushed the slab of flesh across the table toward me. That's when I realized why my arms ached, why my shirt clung wetly to my skin. I looked down. My sleeve was soaked through, crimson dripping onto the floor in steady drops. It wasn't the meat it had been carving. It was me. And as my knees gave out, as the room spun, I swear I heard them all, dozens of them, breathing in the dark around me, masks rustling, cleavers glinting. They had chosen me.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.